Hi everyone, and welcome to today's chat, which is all about leaky gut and leaky lungs, neither of which are particularly scientific terms, but really it's about the relationship between our lungs and our gut, which is, I just think, a really fascinating subject. So the research and interest in the gut microbiome and how that affects all of our body systems and our health, we know has been an exploding field of science for quite a while now. And most of the recent focus has been on the relationship between the gut and the brain, especially in regards to mental health. But there's also been some research on the link between our lungs and the gut. And this is a relationship that's also been long known about, known as the gut-lung axis. But thanks to COVID, it's kind of reignited that research. So embryonic research, that's when you look at the development of an embryo, shows that everywhere in our body that has what we call mucosal linings, which are basically a kind of a barrier that produces mucus as a way of protection. It's part of our immune system. These linings were all created at the same time and they're all connected. Even though they're actually different systems, they're actually the same tissue. So these are places where our body's exposed to the environment, our gut, our lungs, and our vagina as examples. And so as a result of being exposed to our environment, they're rich in bugs, what we call pathogens, and also tons of immune cells. Now, if there is an imbalance of bacteria, which we call dysbiosis, in the gut, then it's not just associated with gut conditions, but it's also been associated with conditions to do with the liver, to do with our brain, to do with our vagina, and also our lungs. And we know that when there is an alteration in gut bacteria, this dysbiosis, it's been shown to actually increase the severity of respiratory infections such as the flu and COVID, that a reduction in specific bacteria, bifidobacteria, and an increase in Clostridia in the gut is also associated with conditions like asthma and chronic antibiotic use, which affects that balance of and diversity of gut bacteria, also increases the risk of lung disease and allergy. So there's been some really interesting research looking at this, particularly in regards to COVID. So just like the gut-brain axis and the gut hormone axis, there is this gut-lung axis. And again, it's a two-way relationship. It's not just one way. So we know that immune cells in our gut travel via the lymphatic circulation to our tissues, including the lungs. And when we have a respiratory infection, that in turn changes our microbiome, our gut bacteria and viruses and yeast and all of their genes in our gut. So an example of this is something called short-chain fatty acids, which are produced by our gut bacteria. These are really important for health. They actually enter the bloodstream, they circulate around, and that can stimulate an immune response in the lungs, even though the short-chain fatty acids have come from our gut. We also know that immune cells move through the lymphatic system between the lungs and the gut, and this affects the immune response in both systems. So they're talking to each other all the time. There's been heaps of studies to show that a less diverse microbiome in babies can also predict the risk of asthma in adulthood. And people with chronic respiratory conditions like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and bronchitis are up to 3 times as likely to get inflammatory bowel disease or even inflammatory or irritable bowel syndrome. So if you have irritable bowel syndrome, it's highly likely you'll have some kind of respiratory or allergic condition like asthma as well. Now, the other thing to know is that it's not just the gut that has the microbiome, the lungs also. Everywhere in our body, actually, there's nowhere that's sterile. Everywhere has the skin, our vagina, they all have their own microbiome. So our lungs have their own microbiome too. And dysbiosis, this imbalance of diversity and an imbalance in numbers can also occur in our lungs. And that doesn't just cause problems for the respiratory system, but will also affect the gut. So, for example, bacteria that can cause pneumonia has also been shown to damage the lining of the intestines. And certain bacteria contain have a compound on their cell wall called LPS, which I've talked about in the past, lipopolysaccharide, which is kind of like a fat, sugary substance. And if we inhale this LPS, then that can lead to the movement of lung bacteria into the bloodstream and into the gut. And this LPS is highly inflammatory. So when we have what's called leaky gut, which is not a scientific term, but it's basically when the integrity of our gut lining is compromised. So that integrity, we have leaky gut all the time. It's a dynamic system where the junctions in our gut basically open up to allow certain compounds into our bloodstream for reasons of health. What happens is if there's inflammation, then that dynamic system doesn't work so well. It's a bit like that swing gate. The swing gate's open all the time when it really shouldn't be. It should be open and shut dependent on what it is that needs to cross into the bloodstream. So if it's kind of the swing gates open all the time, then that's termed leaky gut. It's not really leaky, it's just that things are passing across the barrier that really shouldn't be. And what we know is that if you have this leaky gut, this intestinal hyperpermeability, it's likely that you also have leaky lungs because it's made of the same material, this mucosal lining, which means that we are breathing in substances that might also be passing into the bloodstream, like the LPS, that shouldn't be there. And there's been some really interesting studies on the gut and COVID in terms of diet and supplementation. So nothing will stop you getting COVID, but a healthy, diverse, whole food diet has shown to promote a quicker recovery. They've done studies specifically on probiotic strains. And there was one clinical trial that showed that a mixture of specific probiotic strains, Lactobacillus plantarum and Pediococcus acidilacti, with specific strains, actually over 30 days showed that they could reduce the symptoms and the viral load of people that had COVID-19. And this was independent of how healthy the gut microbiome was in those participants at the start of the trial. Now, this isn't necessarily something you could go out and buy now, but it's been really interesting to show that actually specific probiotic strains can make a massive difference on how quickly we recover from a respiratory condition. And these are probiotics that we are ingesting. They're going into our gut and they are having an effect on our lungs. So most of the probiotics studied have been used on mice, not necessarily humans, but certainly there's a plethora of research that shows that probiotics can reduce inflammation in the lungs. And the biggest difference was shown in smokers, that it can actually help reduce the inflammation on the lungs if you're a smoker. And specific probiotic strains that have been helped in general to reduce inflammation in the lungs is Lactobacillus rhamnosus, in particular Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG, which has been quite a bit of research, Bifidobacterium lactis and Bifidobacterium breve, and Lactobacillus casei shirota. And these are all strains that are commonly found in probiotics that you can buy from health food shops and chemists and dispensaries. And these particular bacteria strains have also been shown to improve that barrier integrity, which prevents that leaky gut, which prevents the movement of these inflammatory substances like LPS from entering the bloodstream and causing inflammation elsewhere in the body too. So by taking these probiotics, they have an effect on the gut, which in turn then affect other systems such as our lungs. So whilst we do need more studies on specific strains, what's been evident from the research is that diet makes such a difference. So a diet rich in fiber and prebiotic foods is key to reducing lung conditions. One of the short-chain fatty acids that's produced by gut bacteria, so when our gut bacteria ferment a food, they produce these short-chain fatty acids as a byproduct, and these are hugely beneficial for us. And one of those short-chain fatty acids is called butyrate, and that's been shown to specifically reduce the severity and risk of respiratory disease, a huge amount of different types of respiratory disease. There was a study based on 120,000 individuals who were followed for up to 16 years. that showed that a healthy diet rich in fiber, which is what our bacteria ferment in order to make the short chain fatty acids, actually led to a 33% decline in the chances of getting certain respiratory conditions such as chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. And that the beneficial effect of fiber on lung function was really significant in those who are smokers. So to break that down, to summarize what I've said, we know diet impacts the health, the diversity of our gut microbiota. The gut microbiota ferments fiber. They create short-chain fatty acids, such as butyrate, which are hugely beneficial to our gut health, our metabolic health, our mental health, and our lung health. That breathing in bugs, whether we've got reflux, or sometimes if we have reflux, the bacteria that's in our gut comes up and we kind of accidentally breathe that in, we aspirate it. Or bugs from our lymphatic system or our blood system, our circulation, can influence our immune response. Our lungs have their own microbiome, which also is influenced by our gut microbiome. And all of that is influenced by what we eat. So it's this big cycle. What we eat influences our gut bacteria, influences our lung bacteria, which influences how our body responds to bugs from outside, and it improves our immune system. It helps to support our immune system do what it's meant to do. So that's kind of to summarize. So the tips that I would give you from the research is that, number one, the good old Mediterranean diet has been shown to be fantastic for reducing inflammation and providing the nutrients needed for a healthy immune system. So it's not necessarily about specific nutrients. If we eat a diet that is full of good food, good whole foods, healthy fats, lots of plants, lots of fermented foods, then we'll get those nutrients for a happy microbiome. So it's paramount that you eat a fiber-rich diet, which includes lots of polyphenols, which you're going to get from colourful plants, and prebiotic foods and probiotic foods, which basically means lots of plants. Eat lots of plants, whether that's legumes, grains, vegetables, fruit. Eat a rainbow and eat 30 different types of plant a week. If you do that, then you'll automatically be getting the prebiotic and the fiber-rich foods. And then on top of that, eat some probiotic foods. Eat your kefir and your kombucha and your kimchi and your sauerkraut and your cultured butter and yogurt and cheese. They're all fermented foods. So get your fermented foods in. Eat something fermented every single day. Colourful plants and 30 different types of plants a week. So there was a really cool quote that came from one of the research articles that I read, and it said a fiber-rich diet changes not only the intestinal microbiota, but also affects the lung microbiota, which indicates the influence, a huge influence on nutrition on lung immunity. The dietary fiber increases these short-chain fatty acids in the blood, thereby providing protection against allergic inflammation in the lungs. It provides better lung function and a lesser risk of lung disorders, and a reduction in mortality, in death from respiratory disease. So eating a fiber-rich diet can make a huge difference to not just our gut, but also our lung health. Now, I don't necessarily recommend a specific probiotic, but certainly the research shows that Lactobacillus casei shirota and Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG in particular has some really good research behind them for respiratory and allergic reactions. So that's something to have a look at the next time you're at a health food store, if you really want a probiotic, but actually just increasing your plants and having fermented type foods, probiotic foods, just doing that can make a massive, massive difference to both your gut and your lung health. So I hope you've got something from it. If you're interested in more, go to my website, read the blog on this. There's about 6 or 7 different references there that you can then have a read of, so you can find out even more information on what the research is saying and even more information about probiotics. So I hope you've got something from it. Let me know, give me feedback, and good luck, take care, and don't forget, eat a rainbow, eat plants, eat 30 different types of plants a week, and your diet will just take care of everything. So see you soon.